As we have been reporting as well this morning, Syria's ceasefire agreement is sadly all but dead. There's just hours to go before it's due to go into effect.
Syrian forces have also fired across the border into refugee camps in Turkey. The United States government has condemned the cross-border attacks.
Attack by the Syrian regime on refugees in bordering countries, and we're absolutely outraged by today's report. We join the Turkish government in calling for the Syrian regime to immediately cease fire, and these incidents are just another indication that the Assad regime does not seem at all willing to meet the commitments that it made to Kofi Annan. Not only has the violence not abated, it has been worse in recent days.
That's the latest from the State Department on Syria. To discuss the situation further, we're joined now by Dr. Anthony Billingsley. He's a former diplomat who's now at the University of New South Wales. Anthony Billingsley, good morning to you.
Morning, Mike.
This ceasefire, it's fair to say, is all but dead now, isn't it?
Well, it's pretty hard to find something positive to say about it. You would expect, I think, some sort of upsurge in violence in the lead up to the ceasefire, but this seems to have gone beyond what would be predictable.
Do you think the Assad regime was playing the international community for a song all the way through?
To an extent, but I think the Syrians have to be fairly careful. Yes, they've got the Russians on side, for example, but the Russians also have other interests at stake, a relationship with the United States and those sorts of concerns. They want to be careful they don't push too far in terms of thumbing their nose at the international community.
This incident overnight, which involved Syrian troops firing into a refugee camp in Turkey, has undoubtedly, or has enraged Turkey. What are the potential implications for what was already a fraught Turkish-Syrian relationship?
Yeah, the relationship's been very difficult. The Syrians have been angry at reported funding by the Turks of the opposition movements. It's not clear yet that this was official policy, the attacks. It may just have been some soldiers taking things into their own hands, as we saw possibly also with Lebanon. But the Turks seem to be taking a very hard line on this. They're now talking about their own idea, which I think probably centres on a sort of a no-go zone between Syria and Turkey, or a free an area where Syrian troops and aircraft, etc., won't be allowed. That could change things very dramatically in the balance there.
OK, Anthony Billingsley, let's assume the ceasefire is dead and the fighting increases or escalates between the government forces and the Syrian Free Army. What are the options now for the international community? Well,
I don't think that the Security Council option is as dead as I think a lot of the media has been portraying it. The problem, to an extent, with the last attempt at a Security Council resolution was basically that the Russians were ambushed by the West. The West contained in their draft resolution elements that they knew the Russians would not tolerate, and so the Russians were basically forced to veto it. If the West were to pursue something which was more carefully and seriously drafted, which didn't have regime change as part of the equation, then you might start to see the Russians moving a little bit more towards the Western position, and that again would put a lot of pressure on Syria.
Is it looking forward to perhaps the end of this year or moving into next year? Is it a matter of time, do you believe, before the Assad regime falls?
I'm not convinced that I've seen any signs of that yet. There's a lot of talk about it, but I think the regime actually feels that it's winning, and this is why it's going for broke here. I think that there's two issues. One is that if they stop their attacks on rebel groups and withdraw their troops, then there'll be all sorts of demonstrations and activity which will expose the regime, which the regime can't tolerate. But also I think that the regime is fairly comfortable in its position over the country.
OK, Anthony Billingsley, as always, thank you very much for your analysis this morning.
You're welcome.